Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at a best case scenario for the Republicans in the 2022 midterm elections, in particular in the Senate. I will be doing another video tomorrow, which will be the exact opposite, which will be the best case scenario for Democrats in the Senate. So, of course, I've filled out the safe states for either party. Of course, in a best case scenario, the state of Ohio would also be safe Republican. Iowa, I've always had a safe Republican since if Chuck Grassley is to run for re-election, he's very likely he's going to win by a large margin, as he always has. And, of course, even if a normal Republican, someone else, decides to run, I think it would still be likely a safe margin. But I'm going to add Ohio to that list in the best case scenario nationwide prediction. So, like in most of my predictions, we'll start from the west and we'll head east with the state of Nevada. Of course, if we look at the last time Nevada's Senate seat was up was back in 2016. Catherine Cortez Masto won a narrow victory over Republican Joe Heck by a little bit over 2 points. The Republican in this scenario, Heck, won every single county except Clark County. He lost that by around 11 points, which is why he ultimately ended up losing the state. Had Joe Heck did as well as Donald Trump did in Clark County and gotten 44%, he probably would have won this election. In fact, he would have won this election if that was the case. But unfortunately for him, that did not happen. Cortez Masto succeeded Harry Reid for Nevada's Senate seat in 2016. If we look at the 2020 election, Nevada was the only Clinton swing state to get more Republican. So in this 2020 hypothetical Republican best case scenario, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say that the Republicans could probably pick off this seat. Again, Catherine Cortez Masto won by a pretty narrow margin electorally. She's not a juggernaut by any means. Nevada always tends to be a close state, and in this scenario, we'll just say hypothetically the energy is on the Republican side, which I think is going to be the case anyway. Of course, it doesn't mean Nevada's going to flip that's not my actual prediction. But for this hypothetical video, we're going to flip the state of Nevada very narrowly to the Republicans. We'll say Republican nominee Adam Laxalt does very well and beats Cortez Masto by a slim margin. And I think even in a best case scenario, this would be a slim margin because I don't really think you're going to see any resounding victors in the 2022 midterms. It's not 2010 anymore. It's not 2014 anymore. Voters are a lot more engaged on both parties, and I don't think midterms are really going to be years where the other party gets absolutely landslided. Of course, it could happen, but I think more likely than not, voters are going to remain engaged for the foreseeable future. We're not going to see like 2014 landslides where we have states like Illinois going red, stuff like that. I think those days are gone and won't be coming back for some time. If we move on to the state of Arizona, incumbent Senator Mark Kelly, if we go here, won his election in this race by 2.4%. That's the same margin that Kyrsten Sinema, who's his Democratic colleague in the Senate, won by the exact same margin against the same person, Martha McSally. The reason Martha McSally ended up in the Senate was because she was appointed to fill John McCain's empty Senate seat upon his death by Republican Governor Doug Ducey. Of course, this was after the election loss in 2018. Martha McSally ended up serving a less than 2-year term before she was voted out by the state of Arizona. If we look at the areas where Mark Kelly did well, of course, Maricopa County is a big one. Pima County, Martha McSally actually did better. It's because she's from that county, I believe, or she once represented part of this county, which makes sense she'd do a bit better. But in a Republican best case scenario, the Republicans would easily be able to win Maricopa County as they did in the past. We can even look at the 2018 midterms, actually, to see some examples of that. We won't go to the governor's race because that's a little too lopsided. But we'll go to, say, the attorney general race. This is a very likely scenario if in a Republican best case scenario in which Republicans are able to win Maricopa County by a lean margin and thus win the rest of the state by a lean margin of around 3 to 4 points. I think that is probably likely. And of course, Arizona being a formerly red state, now a purple state, the reason I don't have this as a likely or even safe seat for a Republican best case, because I don't really think that's realistic. Mark Kelly is a popular incumbent. I think if he were to be beat, it would be by a very narrow margin, and in this best case scenario, it would be by a pretty narrow margin of around 2 points or so. Colorado, in a best case scenario, probably wouldn't flip to the Republicans. I think that would be very unlikely. If we go back to the 2020 elections in the state of Colorado, Republicans did very poorly. Donald Trump in particular did very poorly, garnering only 41.9% of the vote to 55.4% for Joe Biden. And of course, if we look at the change from 2012, this is all because of the core of the state, the Denver metro area and the western part of the state, getting a whole lot bluer for Joe Biden. Now, this has repercussions in the Senate as well. We can take a look at the Senate race here in Colorado, which Cory Gardner, an incumbent, got 44.2% of the vote. I believe that's worse than even John McCain's performance in the state back in 2008, although I could be wrong, but it's close. John Hickenlooper unseating an incumbent Republican by 9 points. So this wasn't just an anti-Trump election, although I do think Cory Gardner's margin of loss here is probably due to President Trump. But I think even if Trump wasn't on the ballot and this was a normal election, Cory Gardner would have still lost by around 4 to 5 points to John Hickenlooper. This just goes to show you how blue the state has become. And I think even in an off year, Colorado is going to remain a blue state. Michael Bennet, who's running for re-election, will probably have no problem winning this state, even in a best-case scenario for the Republicans. If we go back to the 2016 election in Colorado, he overperformed Hillary Clinton. Darrell Glenn overperformed Donald Trump. But if we go back to 2010, which was a red year, Michael Bennet won this race by less than 2 points, but he still was able to win Colorado overall, which I think just goes to show you his electability, even in a red year, able to win in a once was a swing state of Colorado. So I think even in a best case scenario, we're talking a margin of victory of around 5 points for Michael Bennet. And again, that's a best case scenario for Republicans. Moving on to the state of Wisconsin. If we go back to the 2016 election, the last time this seat was up, Ron Johnson was the Republican representing the state, and he won by around 4 points against Russ Feingold. 3 points against Russ Feingold, who once held this seat back in 2010. It was basically a rematch from the 2010 election. The areas where Ron Johnson was able to perform very well were the WOW counties, the counties surrounding Milwaukee that tend to vote very heavily Republican. If we look at the margins, they're all like super safe margins, really. And he did better in them than Donald Trump did. If we go to the 2020 election in the state of Wisconsin, we'll see the exact same thing. The WOW counties got a lot bluer. Trump only got 59% in Washaqa County, 67% for Ron Johnson. So really a startling difference. And one of the reasons that I think in a best case scenario, Ron Johnson would still be able to hold on to these suburbs. Probably not by as strong as he did in 2016, but he'd be able to gin up turnout in the rural areas and probably win the state of Wisconsin by around four points or so. I think would be the ceiling for Republicans in the 2022 midterms. Moving on to the state of New Hampshire, in a best case scenario, we probably would have, and let's go back here, we probably would have Republican nominee, current governor Chris Sununu. And the reason I say that is because Chris Sununu is the only Republican that's beating Maggie Hassan in any polling. All the other Republicans are losing by pretty big margins, actually. The only one who isn't losing by a tremendous margin is Kelly Ayotte, who was the person that Maggie Hassan unseated back in the 2016 election. And we'll take a look at that now, because in the 2016 election, the last time this seat was actually up, Maggie Hassan won. She flipped this seat from red to blue, but by 0.1% against incumbent Kelly Ayotte. Only 1,000 votes made the difference in this race. So it really goes to show you that in a state like New Hampshire, every vote can count, especially in a small swing state like this. A few hundred votes either way can really swing a race and ultimately swing the balance of power in the country. Of course, in a best case scenario, Chris Sununu does run. I don't think, despite how popular he is and the fact that he did win by, if we just take a look real quick, Chris Sununu was able to win the New Hampshire governor's race by a higher margin than any person on the ballot in the state of New Hampshire, winning it by over 30 points, 32 points thereabout. and winning basically every municipality in the state minus a couple. Despite this, though, federal elections are very different than statewide elections. Kristi probably won a sizable chunk of Democrats. I don't actually know. I haven't seen the exit polls on this state, but if there are some, I guarantee you he got either 20 or 30%, possibly higher. Well, probably around 20 or 30% of the Democratic vote, which is one of the reasons, and probably won independents resoundingly. He wouldn't need to do this well, obviously, to win the Senate seat. We'll give him a lean margin. I think the most Kristi probably would be able to do is around 3 points, and that's, again, this is a best case scenario. This isn't my actual Senate prediction, but let's just say hypothetically he probably wins by 3 points. This already puts the Republicans at 50, the Democrats at 46. The state of Pennsylvania, the last time this seat was up was in, again, all these seats were up in 2016. I don't need to keep saying it. Was Pat Toomey against Katie McGinty, who was a former candidate, I think, for another office. I don't remember if she ran for governor or something like that, but she did run, I think, another time statewide in Pennsylvania. Pat Toomey won against her by around 1.5%. He basically doubled. He overperformed. He doubled the margin of victory over Trump's 0.7%, just about. And one of Pat Toomey's greatest strengths was the suburbs. Now, in a best-case scenario, Pat Toomey's not running. He can't run. Well, he can run, but he has chosen not to run either way. So the Republicans, in this best-case scenario, would have a candidate who could appeal to the suburbs, do well enough in the suburban counties, and also keep rural turnout high. Pat Toomey, compared to Trump, did a lot worse in rural areas. He wasn't pulling off the giant margins that Trump was able to pull off. Bedford County, which I think Trump got over 80% in the presidential, Pat Toomey only gets 75%. So there's a trade-off. Pat Toomey does worse in rural areas, but he does better in suburban and urban counties, and that's one of the reasons why he was able to win by a larger margin. Again, he basically wins all the swing counties except Monroe County and Lehigh County. These two counties, sometimes, I don't think they haven't gone red since the beginning of the decade, last decade, back in 2010 in the governor's race, but they are very close nonetheless. But I think whatever Republican is chosen in Pennsylvania will have to win places like Dauphin County. They probably wouldn't win Chester County anymore. If we look at the 2020 results, Chester County is a deep blue county now, a 57 to 40% margin. It's a very blue county. I don't see that changing. They'd probably have to win Bucks County, Northampton, Luzerne, obviously, although I think Luzerne would stay in that category. But either way, I think this race is going to be close. I think it would be a tilt margin. I don't think you'd see a margin anywhere over 2 points. I think, realistically, best case scenario, Republicans probably win at around 2, which is just a borderline of tilt. But I think in any Republican victory, it would probably be either 1 point or something, or even less than a point, because Pennsylvania is just so close. It is just one of those states. And this already gives Republicans the majority, but we're not done here. North Carolina in 2020 went to Donald Trump by 1.3%. This was bluer than its 2016 margin, where Trump almost won it by 4, but he still didn't lose the state of North Carolina. The reason he didn't lose it was because the rural areas trended pretty heavily to him. A lot of these counties are blue counties that trended a little bit more Republican, rural blue counties, large black populations. Trump did better with the black vote in 2020 by a few points, so it makes sense that these shifts would be by a few points. He did worse, of course, in urban and suburban counties, Raleigh, Wake County, Greensboro, all these other areas. Trump did a lot worse. Mecklenburg, Charlotte especially did very poorly. I guess we'll see in the next election if that is Republicans' floor around 31.6%, or if they can go even lower. Because something people don't seem to understand is most suburban counties don't trend, off a cliff toward Democrats. Of course, the exception, I guess, would be Prince George's and Montgomery. That's basically the max you can get just about anywhere. I don't really think that would happen in a place like North Carolina, but they certainly can trend bluer. But I think, obviously, in a best-case scenario, Republicans have a strong nominee, a nominee that can win back votes in the suburbs, probably get around 40 or near 40 in Wake County, get around 36 in Mecklenburg County, run up the margins in these counties, and also hold on to rural areas as well. Tom Tillis was able to outperform Trump in 2020 by a few points. In fact, he won this race by almost 2. I think it's around 1.6. So he outperformed Trump very slightly, but Tillis himself was able to do better in urban counties. He got 37% compared to 35% in Wake County. Mecklenburg 33 instead of 31. Greensboro 37. So definitely, of course, Tom Tillis' weakness is he did slightly worse in the rural counties than Trump, but he made up for it in the urban areas. You're always going to have trade-offs like that in politics. So whichever candidate the Republicans nominate would probably win by a lean margin in a best-case scenario. I'd say anywhere from 3 to 5 points in a best-case scenario. Georgia, the nominee would probably be Herschel Walker in a Republican best-case scenario. He's the only candidate, as we're going to see. He's the only Republican that polls over Warnock in hypothetical polling. See, we have Herschel Walker here. Oh, that's Republican primary polling. We have Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler polling. I don't know where the other polls were for Herschel Walker in the general election. There it is. One of the polls conducted in March has Herschel Walker above. Again, this is only one poll, but as of right now, the making of this video, July 2021, Herschel Walker is the strongest nominee against Raphael Warnock. In this best-case scenario, he goes on to win the state of Georgia by around anywhere from 2 to 4 points, I think is realistic. If we take a look back at the margins in Georgia from the 2020 election, and something people forget, before the runoff elections in Georgia, let me just switch to the Senate gear real quick. Before the runoffs in Georgia, David Perdue, for instance, actually won his Senate race. He got around 49.8%. Ossoff only got 47%. It really was the runoffs and the higher Democratic turnout after the fact that put Democrats over the top in the state of Georgia. In both cases, it was a turnout election, not necessarily the fact that Republicans were completely outnumbered. Of course, Joe Biden won the presidency partly because of the state of Georgia. He won the state of Georgia in 2020 by a very, very narrow margin. It certainly is very possible that in an off year where Republicans are energized, they would win back the state of Georgia. No question. It was one of the closest states in the 2020 election. And of course, like as I said with the runoffs, I think the Republicans, Loeffler and Perdue, I think, if I'm not mistaken, did 100,000 votes worse than Trump. In fact, if they got the same votes as Trump, they actually would have won both of their races, but the turnout wasn't on the Republicans' side. I misgauged. I thought the runoff was going to have a lot lower turnout than it did. It really didn't. It had near presidential election turnout because so much hinged on the race. But we'll say in this hypothetical, again, Warnock wins by 2. He's certainly going to be hard to beat, but I think Herschel Walker in this hypothetical would be able to do it. Of course, Florida, we don't need to talk much about. That would be a safe Republican hold. If we just look back at the 2016 election with Marco Rubio, he won the 2016 Senate race by a likely margin. He could easily win it as safe. In fact, in the polling, he's polling in the high 50s, low 60s against all the other opponents. Even Val Demings, I think he's polling in the high 50s. So this might not even be so much of a Republican best case scenario as it is just this is how Florida is going to vote either way, because it seems like it's going to be safe for Marco Rubio, who's one of the strongest Senate candidates in the country for Republicans in these toss-up races. But anyway, guys, that is it for today's video. This was, of course, the Republican hypothetical best case scenario. This is, I think, the best the Republicans will be able to do in 2020 realistically. 2022, rather. I don't think they'll be able to win the state of North Carolina, but all of the other toss-up states, I think they'll be able to win. Again, these are all these are all tilt and lean margins. I think even in a best case scenario, these races are going to be close. The only race I could see not being tilt and maybe more of a likely margin is possibly North Carolina, but that would really all depend on a lot of factors. But anyway, guys, that is it for today. Thank you all for watching. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any new videos, and I hope to see you in the next one.